Bombs Away is back with an emergency podcast recapping that Carlos Correa is in fact going to be a Minnesota Twin, physical pending. Oh my gosh. The Carlos Correa saga takes more twists and turns than dang Rainbow Road in Mario Kart. I got nothing for how crazy this saga has been. Nothing in Major League history can compare to it, at least not in recent memory, maybe even in all of sports, considering just how he went from a mega deal with the San Francisco Giants to still a very rich contract with the New York Mets, and then now going, as according to Jeff Passan, as according to Ken Rosenthal, Dan Hayes, Aaron Gleeman, all reporting that Carlos Correa is in agreement with the Twins on a 6-year, $200 million contract. The deal can max out to $270 million with vesting options for 4 additional years. Jeff Passan, John Heyman, Ken Rosenthal here on the tweet that I just read. My goodness. After all of this saga, after my lamenting, after me being a little crybaby for the last month, that Carlos Correa is not going to be a Minnesota Twin, and what are the Twins going to do? And oh my goodness, turns out he's in fact a Minnesota Twin. I mean, you guys have been here through all the ups and the downs and the roller coaster rides and everything. I mean, if you were following me on Twitter last night, it was a wild ride. Because, of course, there was the Correa news that he was going to the Giants, and that was whatever. You moved on. Then, all of a sudden, the deal falls apart, and he goes to the Mets. And you're like, Falvey, Levine, you missed your chance. He's gone. He fell in your laps. The physical wasn't good. He fell through, and the Mets came and swooped him up, and here you are holding the bag. And we thought that was it. That was the end of it. He was going to sign with the Mets. And then there was a physical issue, and even then you thought, well, Steve Cohen still is going to just make this deal go through no matter what. He doesn't want to look like he's holding the bag because he went out and talked to John Heyman of the New York Post and said, hey, he didn't say Correa's name, but he said we wanted to get another bat, and this move is it. So he winked and nodded that they were going to sign Carlos Correa, and then a deal held up in the physical. And you thought, no matter what, that there still was going to be a deal to go through, because why wouldn't there? I mean, he pivoted. There was no way that they were going to pivot from the Giants to the Mets without there being like, okay, this is in writing. We're ready to make this deal happen. No, apparently there wasn't, because the Mets found the same hiccup that the Giants did. Of course, there's a plate in Carlos Correa's ankle from when he slid into a base wrong in the minors in 2014 when he was in the Astros organization. And I am just bewildered at how this whole scene has developed for the Minnesota Twins. You thought for sure that the Mets were just going to make this thing go through, that they were going to just push it across the goal line. It's ugly. It's like the quarterback on a QB sneak didn't quite get in the end zone, but doggone it, the 2 running backs are just going to ram into his back and make sure that no matter what, he's getting across the finish line. I thought that was going to happen for the Mets. Now, maybe the contract wasn't going to look quite the same, but I thought he was going to be a New York Met. And according to, I just heard Darren Wolfson talk about on the Score North pod that even a lot of Twins executives didn't think that Correa was going to be a Twin even at the end of last weekend or going into last weekend, when there was the first initial news that the Twins are kind of creeping back into this thing. They're at least engaging with Scott Boras, and Scott Boras is talking back. And a lot of Twins people thought that, you know, they still weren't going to get him. It still was going to be a long shot. But to get Carlos Correa now and to have this whole situation resolved, I mean, there's just a whole bunch of ways I could delve into it. Let me first talk about the optics of the situation, because the Twins have never done anything like this before. I sat here back last March and talked to you about how the Twins never do this. They never go get a free agent in the caliber of Carlos Correa. Now, we all understood it was under the caveat of basically a 1-year contract. So like that was it. I know it was a one and done deal. He just needed a year. There was the lockout. It was really weird. He didn't quite get the contract he was looking for. Give him a year, let him reset the market on himself. He'll get that contract. Well, he did, and then he didn't. And then he did, and then he didn't. And then he did, and hopefully gets this one with the Minnesota Twins. But the Twins make this move that they've never done before, because their initial offer was 10 years, $285. that, even though it got blown out of the water by San Francisco and even still got outmatched clearly by the New York Mets and their initial agreement with Carlos Correa, that's still serious money. We talked about it on the podcast. I said they should have went up enough. Now, granted, that's before we knew everything, and the Twins didn't even know everything either with the ankle or how serious that it was going to be for these clubs. But I said, get over 300 if you can. Go spend the money on Carlos Correa. And because this is something that you set the precedent that you're capable of doing last year in a different setting. You've already kind of dipped your toe in the water. Go swimming in the ocean, as Scott Boras mentioned that the Twins were doing. They were fishing in the ocean. You've already cast your line far enough. Just go a little bit further and see what happens. And the Twins apparently didn't even need to do that because of the money that they got Correa, but they never do anything like this. Carlos Correa, I know he's been a Twin already, so it feels a little bit different, but the Twins don't make moves like this. The closest thing you can compare it to in Twins history is Joe Mauer's contract extension. And by the way, Joe Mauer's contract extension now looks like nothing. So, and by the way, at the end of Carlos Correa's contract, this stuff, it's going to be a lot of money, but in terms of how much superstars are going to be getting paid by the end of Carlos Correa's first guaranteed 6 years, it's going to dwindle in comparison into the inflation of these MLB contracts. So that's my point of the Twins need to go for it. They've already set the precedent. They just need to go do this. And this is something that they have never done before, and I'm glad that they did it. Now, they had the money to spend because they had a big Correa-sized hole in their payroll already as they try and get to be about 15. I think that's where the Twins realistically are going to end up in payroll, somewhere in that 17 to 13 range of payrolls in Major League Baseball. They're still not even at 15 with Carlos Correa being on the books once that contract allegedly gets dried. I mean, we all know how this thing is gone, but the Twins never do this kind of thing, and they need to, because that's the whole point of Falvey and Levine. That was the whole point of short-term contracts, because we want short-term contracts so we can get off of them easy, so that way we have financial flexibility in free agency to go get a guy we really want. Carlos Correa is as good of a guy to get as there is out there, and there will be out there in the next few years. Mookie Betts doesn't show up on the free agent market. He got traded to LA and they locked him up before he could even sniff it. Franchise players rarely get to free agency. It was a rarity that Carlos Correa even got there if they didn't already have to pay Bregman and the whole laundry list of guys that they have in Houston. So there's a whole list of free agents that never get to free agency. And for the Twins to be able to get Carlos Correa, not just for 1 year now, but potentially for 7, if you include last year, and then potentially if Carlos Correa's got incentivized deals in that contract that we'll get to in a second, that could even get it up to 10 years, as I mentioned in the Ken Rosenthal tweet. So my point is, if the Twins weren't going to do this for Carlos Correa, who are they going to do this to? I know back in 2019, they were willing to throw all of the money at Zach Wheeler and to try and get him to come to Minnesota. Didn't quite work, but the Twins, and this according to Darren Wolfson, who I trust, is that the Twins were close. They were close money-wise. He just wanted to go play for Philadelphia. So that's the thing. The Twins have shown under Falvey and Levine that they can get close in the dollar amount, maybe not the 350 or even the 312 that the Giants and Mets did, but that they're going to get close enough to where if something like this happens, where the deal falls through for one way or another, the Twins are able to swoop in and go get this deal. So Carlos Correa, now a Minnesota Twin. And by the way, the 10 years, 285 apparently is what Carlos Correa is worth. So Carlos Correa, average annual value, he's going to make about $30 million a year, somewhere in that $30 to $33 million a year range. That's good because he was making $35 million last season, in that range. So he's making roughly the same amount of money that he was last year. And you're still able to go get some pieces. You still have Byron Buxton, who unsung hero of this. If Byron Buxton and the Minnesota Twins don't mutually kind of get it and understand what Byron Buxton's contract needed to look like, especially on Buxton, Byron Buxton signing the contract he did last year enabled the Twins to go do this with Carlos Correa. Now, there's no salary cap in baseball. They could have just did it anyways. But realistically, and with what the Twins were doing, Byron Buxton's contract is the unsung hero of the Carlos Correa situation. And now Correa's here and he's on this contract. It wasn't 10 years, 285, but it's 6 years, $200 million. That's good. I will take that. Obviously, I want Carlos Correa to be a Twin for life, but getting him for 6 years, you get him through the rest of his prime athletically. He's 28 years old. You're going to get him till he's 33, 34 at worst. Those are the prime years. Now, maybe he's already in them with the last few, obviously, but he's still there. He's a guy who's a very, very solid hitter. He's not a top 4 hitter in baseball or anything, but he's a very, very, very solid hitter who plays one of the best shortstops I've ever seen in my life. As a Twins fan who's grown up with Christian Guzman and Jason Bartlett and Alexi Casilla, Adam Everett. I mean, there's a Pedro Florimon. There's a whole bunch of shortstops in there who have not been good. I'm sorry. Like, I loved Alexi Casilla as a kid, but have you seen Carlos Correa throw a baseball? It is amazing. The zip he has on that thing, his range, everything Carlos Correa is able to do. He looks like a quarterback out there, the way he commands the field, the way he takes charge. So Carlos Correa, I've seen Byron Buxton. I've seen Torrey Hunter. I've seen some great fielding from the outfield. But in terms of an infielder, I've never seen anybody at any position with the ability that Carlos Correa has had. And that's amazing that he gets to be a Minnesota Twin. And the Twins, again, if not now, when were they ever going to do this contract for anybody? And they finally do it on Carlos Correa, which seems like the perfect fit. He was already here for a year. The Twins already know what they're getting. Twins fans already know the guy. There's going to be hype with Correa, but at least him, I know he's the third choice. I know the Giants and the Mets were there first, but this is where the most money was. Like, that's what he was going to do. And now the Twins had the most money on the board, but he still chose to come to Minnesota. He still could have worked it out with the Mets. He could have worked something out with the Giants. There could have been the Boston Red Sox could have came in, or the Yankees or some other team could have came in. And now maybe the Twins were just the last guy standing, but whatever. He still chose to come back to Minnesota. Now, it wasn't like he chose the Twins above a lot of money, but he still is back in Minnesota. I've been very high on the Carlos Correa train. I've been very big on the Twins need to bring back Carlos Correa. And the fact that this has happened and this is manifested. And last night, I'll be honest, through this whole timeline, I did not expect Carlos Correa to come back to the Minnesota Twins. Did not at all. Once the news broke that he was a Giant or going to be one, it was over. In my mind, he was gone. Even as the physical stuff was wonky, I still said, something will get done. And then the Mets swoop in. And again, we talked about it. The incentive for Steve Cohen just to push this thing across the finish line still thought was there enough for the deal to get done. And then you see all these pieces from John Heyman, who pretty much will just say whatever Scott Boras tells him, which is fine. That's not a bad thing, but you just have to take it with that proverbial grain of salt that this is the player's agent talking and maybe not necessarily the team. But then there was the Athletic article last night with Ken Rosenthal and Dan Hayes. And what that was talking about was, guys, this is some serious momentum. The Twins are making a real push here. And a lot of comments, and from a lot of Mets fans, but from a lot of baseball fans in general, mouthpiece for Boras, mouthpiece for Boras, mouthpiece for Boras. Maybe that was true. Maybe I'm sure they talked to Scott Boras and all this. But Ken Rosenthal is like Jeff Passan. They don't just run with what agents say. They will source it. They will go a little bit of a step further. Now, there's nothing wrong with just saying what the agent says, but those are guys who are very careful about when they do break news because of the power that Jeff Passan and the power that Ken Rosenthal have on Twitter. Once Ken Rosenthal and Dan Hayes put a piece out, I was like, guys, this is something to get excited about. This isn't just Carlos Correa's agent trying to get the Vikings to or the Twins rather, to give him some more money. Or the Mets, sorry. Minnesota sports on the brain today. So this wasn't just Boras trying to power play the Mets for more money. This was, and maybe it was in the end, maybe it was one of the tactics, but this was legit steam. There were legit conversations going on between the Twins and Boras about Correa. And then to see it get corroborated by Heyman, I tweeted that last night, like the snowball is rolling. You could just feel the momentum change once that Athletic article by Rosenthal and Hayes came out, that this thing was shifting. And just, we talked about the optics for the Minnesota Twins. They don't do this type of move, but now they have. And now the floodgates are open. I'm not saying they need to be a top 5 payroll team in baseball, but they sit at 15th, middle of the pack. That's about, if you look at where the Twins are financially and how much income they get in mid-market and TV contracts, that's about fair if you're looking at it from a business perspective. Now, obviously, as a fan, I want them to spend as much money as possible. And I think realistically, their window is open. They have a bunch of young prospects. They have Carlos Correa now and Byron Buxton locked up. The pitching staff has a nice mix of youth and veteran aspect, although missing a number one starter. We'll get to kind of where the Twins can go from here after this, because this roster still isn't perfect. I mean, this is the 2022 Twins, a la guys being healthy. So, they're not World Series contenders on this move alone, but it's a nice push in the right direction. The Twins, but that's the thing, it's a push in the right direction, which means the Twins have a face of the franchise shortstop. He is a face of the franchise. He is a once-in-a-generation player at a position that is one of the most important on the baseball field. I know Buxton has health issues, but you have center field and shortstop, and now you just signed Christian Vasquez at catcher. Defensively, those are three of the most important positions on the field. And for them to at least have them all taken care of and locked up for at least the next 3 years with Vasquez's contract is amazing. And that means that there's more room to go. It means that the Twins shouldn't just use this as we signed Correa, now we're all done. No, that's not what they should do. This is, in the word, to quote Count Dooku in Star Wars, this is just the beginning. Like, this is everything that the Twins, this is the start of everything that the Twins need to do. This isn't the end. They can't just clap their hands and say, all right, well, off season, well done. Let's wait for Fort Myers and the World Baseball Classic to come around. No, there still is moves that can be made. I think realistically, the Twins will end up around 15 in terms of payroll in baseball, 15 out of 30, but they should push the envelope. I'm not saying the Twins need to be the 6th highest payroll in baseball. The Texas Rangers, the Dodgers, the Mets, they're all just blowing everybody away right now. You're not going to catch up to them even if you want to. I know Pohlads are the 8th richest ownership group in baseball. You're just not going to get there. But can you get closer to 13th? Can you get to 12th? Maybe even if you get a right trade deadline move, can you get into that top 10 of payroll? No, that's obviously looking very down the deep end. The Twins would have to be very much in a good position by July to want to accept another big contract on the books. But the point is, the Twins shouldn't just be content with this Carlos Correa signing. This should be the start. And the Twins, and even when the Carlos Correa contract gets to the twilight, or maybe in 4 years, the Twins get rid of Carlos Correa and his numbers, his money is off the books. Okay, but you've already established, not just from Falvey and Levine, all the way up to the Pohlads, you've established that you can go out and get a prized free agent, that you can go out and get a top guy. Now, you're not going to outspend everybody, but there's no reason why the Minnesota Twins should not be in the conversation. Half the battle is money. The other half of the battle is convincing free agents to go to Minnesota. You convinced Carlos Correa to come to Minnesota the first time, and you still got him around to coming the second time. I know it had to go through a couple guys first. I know he wasn't the first choice off the bat. But he still chose to come here. He's still here. He chose to spend 6 years here and possibly more. You have to like Minnesota enough to do that and playing at Target Field and being a part of the Twins. But if you're a starting pitcher and you look at a team that has Carlos Correa and Byron Buxton, and depending on, there's Alex Kirilloff, there's Jose Miranda, Royce Lewis down the pipe, Trevor Larnach's here. There's a whole bunch of young bats that could ascend. And if you're a free agent pitcher, that makes it a lot more enticing to come. If you're a free agent in some way to maybe be a DH or to add depth at first base, I don't know, whatever. If you're an extra guy that the Twins want to help get you over the top, now this isn't just 2023 like last year was all in on 2022. You can think throughout the next 6 years, because as long as you have Carlos Correa and Byron Buxton and a lot of these young prospects on their rookie contracts, essentially, your window is open. The Minnesota Twins window to compete is wide open, and Carlos Correa makes sure of that. And this move by the Twins establishes that they can do more. They've already shown that they're willing to commit to a big player like Carlos Correa, and you can't just commit to him and be done with it. You've already cast your line out. You're already swimming in the deep end of the pool. You can't just swim right back in and say, whoa, made it to the deep end. You got to do the backstroke out here a little bit. You gotta float out here. You gotta swim. Can you tell I only got to like level 3 of swimmer's ed in elementary school? Not an ideal swimmer. I sink like a rock, but I mean, this move just for the Twins is franchise altering. He's the biggest free agent signing in Twins history, breaking last year when he was the biggest free agent signing in Twins history by a long shot. And legacy wise for Carlos Correa, and then we'll go to where the Twins go next here. But legacy wise for the Twins and for Carlos Correa, he has the potential, and I know a lot needs to change and they need to win in the postseason for them to do this. But Carlos Correa, if he continues on the career trajectory that he is on, could go down as one of the best Minnesota Twins ever. I know there's Correa. I know there's Oliva. I know there's Puckett. I know there's Mauer thrown into there and a whole bunch of others who I'm not listing off. But he's as talented as any of them. He has the talent. Now the Twins just need to go and put themselves in a position to win and put themselves in a position to do the things that winning organizations in baseball need to do. And Carlos Correa, when it's all said and done, has the ability to be one of the best Twins of all time. He has the ability, and now we have the next 6 years plus last year, so we'll have spent 7 years if this contract gets to the end of the guaranteed portion. He'll have spent 7 years in a Twins uniform compared to when he was with Houston, 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. He spent 7 years in Houston, so he'd spent the half of his career with the Twins. He has a chance to go down as one of the best Twins of all time, especially if they can do something in the playoffs. But Carlos Correa has potential to be one of the Twins' greats if he stays here. Do they retire number 4? I don't know about that. I'm not going to say that that's happening today, but he's got the potential to. There's the potential that in 15 years, that number 4 is hanging up in the rafters because of Carlos Correa. But he's on a Hall of Fame trajectory. Carlos Correa is. He's got a World Series. He has the notoriety. He has the platinum glove. He hits great. Not elite, but great. He fields elite. And he's a shortstop. He could potentially be a third base down the line. Are you married to Jose Miranda at first base? Does he eventually or at third base? Does he eventually kick over to third? What do you do with Brooks Lee and Royce Lewis? Now that's all speculation stuff, but you have backup plans at shortstop. If Carlos Correa in the next 4 years, maybe 4 years from now in the 2027 season has to become a third baseman, that's fine. That is more than fine. He'll become a third baseman. You have some shortstops that you can use in Royce Lewis and Brooks Lee, or maybe there's somebody else down the line who comes up through the Twins system. But there is stuff to do there. There are things that there's a plan. There's places Correa can go. Do you want him to go to first base? Then maybe that's if he stays through the very, very end of the contract. If it does get to 10 years, you're probably seeing Carlos Correa as the starting first baseman, or maybe just going into a straight up DH role. But until then, the Twins have a great player who has the potential to go down as one of the best players in Twins history. He makes this team better. He was able to, the Twins got him for considering he could have made as much as $350 million to now making a total of $200 million guaranteed up to $270. Obviously, Carlos Correa lost out on a lot of money, but it's still life-changing money, and he's still doing it with the Minnesota Twins. Because at the end of the day, I don't care that he was the Twins' third choice, because at the end of the day, if he's still a Minnesota Twin, it's all I care about. And the last thing with Carlos Correa, and then we'll get to where the Twins can go from here, is I get the frustration from fans about the injury concerns. I do. Because the Twins have a track record of acquiring damaged goods. You look at Sam Dyson in 2019. You look at even just last year with Chris Paddock and Tyler Mahle. The Twins bring in guys with injury concerns. And the reason that the Twins get them is because they're willing to overlook those injury concerns. How do you think the Twins are willing to get Carlos Correa? There had to have been some under-the-table agreement between Falvey and Boris where it's like, look, man, we've seen him enough. We're going to do a physical, but don't worry. This deal's getting through. We're going to figure it out. Carlos Correa doesn't pivot, and they don't pivot for the second time, Correa and Boris, if there's no under-the-table agreement that the Twins might overlook some stuff on the physical. I saw posted on Twitter the gif of the guy who's like a security guard, but he's not even patting people down as they go, and he's just kind of waving his hand over them. And that's basically what the Twins are going to they're going to be extensive in the physical, but there had to have been some under the table agreement that that they're going to look the other way on some stuff, and that they're just going to be willing to overlook some of the deficiencies to acquire Correa. That's how the Twins got Chris Paddack. They were willing to overlook the injury concerns of a deal that the Mets a week before nixed because they didn't like Paddack's elbow. So there's some injury concerns there. I get it if you're the Twins. Like, we're this guy's third choice. Get out of town. Like, does this guy really want to be here? He's probably just here for the money. Yes, but Carlos Correa made that openly clear with the Dwyer bag. Dwyer? Oh, I'm pretty white. I don't get that reference. That bag for Carlos Correa. And he basically said, look, I'll play. If you pay me what I'm worth, I'll play. But here's the thing. It's not like the Twins are signing Lance Lynn in 2018, where, yeah, he went where he was going to make the most money. But he hated being there, and he knew he was only going to be there for a year. Carlos Correa openly talked about staying in Minnesota. Now, whether it's lip service or not, nobody will ever really know. But you got to think there was some truth to there with how extensively he talked about Rocco in the front office and the clubhouse and his wife liking Minnesota and Minneapolis and all that kind of stuff. There had to have been some truth to that, at least enough of it to consider. The Twins were always in the mix. They were always kind of the second dog, but they were always in the mix. And Correa could have just flat out told them to scram, and they never did. So that had to have meant something. I get the Twins are the third choice. And I get that he's coming here because the Twins are offering him the money and they're willing to overlook the injuries and they're setting themselves up in some traps that they got themselves into in the past. But Carlos Correa is different than Lance Lynn. Carlos Correa is way different than Lance Lynn. He's way different than Chris Paddack and Tyler Mahle. He's a franchise player. He is a generational talent. He's a generational talent at one of the most important positions on the field who already has a rapport with your clubhouse and with your team and the guys already love him. The Twins already know what they're getting with Carlos Correa. It's not like they're signing up for an unknown. He's going to come back in there with a hero's welcome to the Twins clubhouse when they arrive down to Fort Myers. It's going to be good. Byron Buxton already, he kind of subtweeted it by tweeting something like, let's get it, with a video of I think him and Correa. They were just kind of talking to each other in the dugout during one game. Like, he knows and he's excited. Why wouldn't Byron Buxton be excited that he gets protection in the order with Carlos Correa? Either he's hitting behind him or he's hitting in front of him. Either way, offers him some protection in the order. And I know the biggest thing with Carlos Correa with Twins fans is going to be the injuries. And oh boy, here we go again. They could be setting themselves up for that. That's possible. But Correa is just too good of a player, I think, to have this really backfire. I think he's too good. I think he's too talented to not take a risk. All draft picks, all free agent signings, no matter if you're signing a minor league free agent or Joey Gallo to a one-year deal or Carlos Correa to the contract you're signing him to, there is always going to be risk. But I think Carlos Correa is worth the risk. Don't you? Multi-time All-Star, World Series champion, has played in 3 World Series. It's just, I think it's worth it. It is so worth it to have Carlos Correa be here and be in a Minnesota Twins uniform. And if you look at his numbers, and I'm trying to pull up here his numbers with runners in scoring position. So if you look at Carlos Correa with runners in scoring position, Carlos Correa, he had a slash line of 283, 364, and 374. That was with runners in scoring position. Now, that's good on its face, but then when you look at the run production, he had 30 RBIs and 1 home run over the course of the season with runners in scoring position. So I can see why fans look at the injury history and they look at the money and they look at just how this whole drama played out. And they remember him last year as a guy who didn't really come up in the clutch and a guy who had a good season when it was all said and done, but really kind of got a lot of, in the words of, football, got a lot of garbage time points. He got a lot of at-bats and he got a lot of production in at the end that made it look better. I understand that. But if you've listened to the Bombs Away podcast all summer long last year, I said, guys, Carlos Correa is too good of a pro for this to be who he is his entire career. And I saw Twins fans use that even last summer to say, who needs him? He's not clutch. Yes, he is. Carlos Correa is a clutch baseball player. He is a guy who's going to be good. He's a guy who's going to be good when it matters most. And he wasn't last season. But that's fine because he will be this season. He's too good of a player to not have a natural regression. And I think this is the big thing we need to remember. And Twins fans need to remember this. And I talked about it with Buxton last year in an article I wrote for Zone Coverage. And I'm going to say it again with Carlos Correa. Let's not, and myself included, because I did this 10 years ago, let's not fall into the same trap with Joe Mauer where we expect every year to be an MVP season. You're never going to get that. Now, in 6 years, should I expect 3 good ones out of Carlos Correa? For sure. Are one of them could one of them be a year he misses completely due to injury? Of course. Could one be just a down year? Also, of course. But I think if you get 3 really good years of Carlos Correa in the prime of his career, that's really good for your baseball team. So you know what? Yeah, I'm willing to take on the risk of Carlos Correa. I think it's okay. His numbers with runners in scoring position weren't good last year. And I was one of the first ones to tell you that. But I was also one of the first ones to tell you that that's not who Carlos Correa is as a player. That's just not what the numbers show. Let's take a look at his, if I can pull up his career here. I don't think I can. Here we go. Let's see if we can get some of the numbers with Carlos Correa over the course of his career. In Carlos Correa's career, he has 155 home runs, driven in 553 RBIs, has a slash line here of 279, 358, 479 with an 836 OPS. And that's without diving into the deep stats and the underlying numbers and all this kind of stuff. He's an above average to really good hitter who plays elite defense at one of the most important positions on the field. He's worth it. He's worth every penny, and especially for the fact that the Twins got him on such a good deal. I mean, the more I look at this contract, the more I see how much this can benefit the Twins. I think it's fair. It's not like they fleeced Correa. He's still getting paid a lot of money. And the average annual value, I think there's only maybe 1 or 2 players more in baseball who are going to make more money than he is. He still is going to make a lot of money throughout his career, just not as much as maybe he hoped to, or he definitely hoped to. But here's Dan Hayes. Once medicals are finalized and Twins are said to be comfortable with what they've already seen, the physical is taking place right now today. And by the way, I think the ankle portion of it is over and the Twins are pretty much green lighting it. The first $200 million of Carlos' contract is guaranteed. The final 4 years have vesting options. Now, what vesting options mean is Carlos Correa is going to have to hit certain incentives. Whether it's the season before, he has to get to a certain amount of plate appearances to show that he's healthy enough, that he can play in all these games to unlock the next season. And how much money he makes in that next season is also dependent on some of that production. The 4 final years of his vesting amounts at 575, so he needs to get 575 plate appearances, 550, 525, and 502 each consecutive year. So the longer down the line, they get less and less in terms of the at-bats, but still have that incentive there. So were Carlos Correa not to reach that 575 number in 2029, if he was not to get 575 at-bats, he wouldn't just become a free agent. It would then turn into a club option. The Twins could pay him $25 million that year. And by the way, if the Twins are going to pay him 33 to all of a sudden get him down to 25 later in his career, this is just such a good contract for the Twins, as good as it can get for Carlos Correa and for the Minnesota Twins. Maybe not so much for Correa, but for the Twins. When finalized, the deal, whether 6 years or 10, according to Dan Hayes in a tweet thread, would not include any opt-outs for Correa. He's in this thing, whether it's 6 years or whether it's 10 years. There's no trades, no trade clause, no opt-outs. Carlos Correa is going to be a Minnesota Twin. This contract is so good for the Twins, and it fell into their laps. I'm not going to say Falvey and Levine were manipulating the market. They're guys who tend to sit back and let things come to them, and sometimes things pass them by, like Correa almost did twice. So that is something to keep in mind. I'm not going to say that they're experts, and this is obviously the best system ever. It's not. But for what they're willing to do, it played perfectly for them this year, and it played perfectly for them last year. And so, love it or hate it, the patient approach and willing to sit back and willing to do all that stuff and not budging off that number and overcommitting got them to where they're at right now. So the patient approach pays off for Falvey and Levine, but he did fall into their laps. He did. He fell into their laps the first time with Correa not able to reach a contract and firing his agent, and Boris coming in at the last second and just finding a team that happened to be the Minnesota Twins. And this year, I mean, the whole thing could be Correa hurting that ankle and having the plate vibrate like he talked about and having to leave the game. I can't remember if it was in Kansas City, against Kansas City, whatever. He had to leave the game. And he said after the game, I got a metal plate in my ankle. Sometimes that vibrates and I had to leave. Now, he didn't miss any time and he came back and hit just fine to end the season. So it's not like it was a cause for concern. It was just like, hey, man, I'm not going to be able to finish out this game. Somebody's got to come in and finish for me. That's fine. So I think in all this, he just fell into the Twins' lap. I think the unsung hero is that he ended up hurting the plate, and it made a lot of teams just get really skittish over it. Because the difference, and this is for Twins fans who are worried about the injury risk and the money that they're paying Correa, is that this isn't for 12 years and $35 million a year. The Giants backed out because they didn't want to pay a guy with a plate in his ankle $35 million when he's 41 years old. That's fair. That's fair for the Giants to want to back out or renegotiate. And the same thing for the Mets. It was going to be a 12-year contract. So Carlos Correa was going to get paid through 2034. That's a lot of money. And he was going to be getting paid probably somewhere along the lines of $28 to $33 million when he was in his late 30s. Not mid to late 30s, full late 30s. So you can understand why the teams want to back out. Contract insurance, I don't understand it. But teams basically getting insured on the contract in case a guy gets hurt. Getting insurance on a 10-year fully guaranteed contract wasn't going to happen for the Mets. But for the Twins to get a 6-year deal that could be 10, but not fully guaranteed, they could get the injury insurance on that, and they did. And now the deal isn't set in stone, and through this whole saga, it's just taught us that you can never really understand what's going to happen. And until the Twins put out the official statement and until the opening press conference actually happens, because keep in mind, Correa was in the hotel room in San Francisco, ready to go to whatever it's called, Oracle Park now, in San Francisco, and go sign that contract and be done with it a month ago. He was ready. He was in the hotel room until the Giants caused for concern with the ankle. So the unsung hero in all this is that Carlos Correa's ankle plate vibrated and scared teams off back in some meaningless game at the end of September. So there you go. That's what helped out the Minnesota Twins in this situation. I've always said Carlos Correa is worth the risk. Now, where do the Twins go from here? What is the plan going forward? Well, the Twins did make one announcement today from the I don't know what the official title is, but he's basically the head of communications for the Minnesota Twins, and that is Dustin Morse. And his official title is Twins Communications Marketing Player Relations. The Twins announced that they've acquired right-handed pitcher AJ Alexy, from the Nationals in exchange for minor league right-handed pitcher Christian Jimenez. To make room on the 40-man roster, the Twins have DFA'd Oliver Ortega, who they just claimed off waivers from the Angels a couple weeks ago. So the Twins basically were like, we can upgrade from this guy. Don't know much about AJ Alexy, really at all. There's nothing to talk about with AJ Alexy that I can really tell you. Didn't have time to really deep dive on him. I'm trying to find a tweet from a friend of the podcast, Brandon Warren. He had something here about it with Alexy, trying to see if I can find it here. But I'm just looking at some of this here. Okay, here's the tweet. Fastball, slider, curve, pretty decent stuff, but fits best as a reliever, which is fine. The Twins need help in the bullpen, and he's just an additional guy to throw in the machine and see what you can get out of the bullpen. The Twins really haven't addressed it outside of re-signing Emilio Pagan. So for them to get an additional help, he's a righty. So just another guy to throw in the mix with that bullpen. Now, where do the Twins go? because there's an Athletic article with Aaron Gleeman, Dan Hayes, Ken Rosenthal, kind of breaking down a lot of the Correa stuff, a lot of the Correa intrigue. And so he talks about where do the Twins go next? Right-handed hitting corner outfielding. That's something that they need. And now they have Joey Gallo, they have Max Kepler, they have Trevor Larnach, they have Alex Kirilloff, they have Matt Wallner. They have an abundance of left-handed hitting corner outfielders. They need a right-handed hitting corner outfielder. AJ Pollock just signed, forget which team, but he's off the market. So AJ Pollock is gone. He's off the market. The Twins are going to have to figure out where else to go to get a right-handed hitting corner outfielder. And I don't have the list in front of me of the free agents. I can't imagine there's really anybody left who would provide some significant impact or at least be better than Kyle Garlick. And Kyle Garlick is just fine. He's not great, not good, but he's fine. If you need him to play one day because there's a lefty or fill in, fine. But if you need Kyle Garlick to start 5 games in a row or 10 games in a row, now you're getting into some pretty dicey territory. But there's some moves to be made with that and getting a right-handed hitting corner outfielder just to be able to mix. You need to improve from Garlick somehow. That's going to be one of the areas to do it. We talked about the bullpen. They just need more bodies. And I was going to do at some point this week my state of the relief of the bullpen, of the relief corps. And maybe we'll get to that later this week, but the Correa emergency pod sprung me to action here before we really had a chance to deep dive. And I'll deep dive on that when we get the chance. I want to give that some time because it's a really interesting unit. But quick version or it's a little sneak peek. The Twins could, in theory, use some of the plethora of starting pitchers they have in the bullpen, especially if they're going to use that philosophy of 5 and dive or second time through the orders, little dicey, or pulling you out of the game. If they're going to do that, they might as well take some of those starters, pair them together, and try and eat some extra innings out of that. Now, you're going to end up carrying a lot of pitchers, and that's going to mess up your dynamics, but the Twins were already trusting a lot of guys to throw 1 inning and be done anyways, and that blew up spectacularly, especially when you had to make them pitch 7 innings every game from the bullpen. So that just wasn't going to work without any type of long reliever situation. So anyway, let's talk about where they can go with the bullpen. There's really no options to bring in. So there's no free agent pitcher out there that's really worth getting in the bullpen that can really make a big difference. Could be a trade somewhere. Again, like we talked about with Garlick, the trade market's where you're going to have to go. Do the Twins want to expend a lot of resources on a reliever? Do they want to trade a lot of resources for a reliever? I don't think they do that. I think realistically, maybe they re-sign Michael Fulmer. Maybe that's the free agency plan to go. Michael Fulmer played nicely for the Twins. Wasn't great. Wasn't horrible. I wouldn't mind bringing him back. So Michael Fulmer could be an option for the Minnesota Twins, of course, who they acquired at the trade deadline from Detroit. Bringing him back wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Also, with the bullpen, keep in mind, they got to figure out Pablo Lopez, Yohan Duran, Jorge Alcala hopefully comes back this year and pitches well off injury. I'm really high on Jorge Alcala, so hopefully he can come back and have a nice year. But those are some guys in the mix. Of course, you have Jax, who established himself as a nice bullpen arm. You have Caleb Thielbar, who keeps humming along and has just been a really awesome success story. Emilio Pagan, you know my position on Emilio Pagan. So with the Twins and with where everything stands, I think the final point to make reference of on where this team can go and how they can get better is going to be in starting pitching. Now, the Twins have a nice plethora of 2 to 3 starting pitchers, number 2, number 3 options in your rotation, but they don't have a bona fide ace. They couldn't get Carlos Rodon. They couldn't get any of the obviously you weren't going to get Verlander, you weren't going to get DeGrom, but you couldn't get Rodon, you couldn't get Evaldi, you couldn't get Talion. There's a whole bunch of guys who the Twins could have went after and they didn't because they spent a lot of their time on the Correa sweepstakes. Well, now's their chance to kind of buy it back, and they're going to have to make a trade because outside of Michael Wacha, there's nobody. I know Trevor Bauer could be available. I'm not touching Trevor Bauer outside of his allegations and whatever. That's a whole debacle. Outside of that, he hasn't pitched in 2 years. That's important. How rusty is he going to be, and how important are you relying on that? Now, I know there's a connection with Falvey and Levine because of, I believe, Falvey's time in Levine's time, in Houston. Can't talk. In Cleveland for that one, and I just I don't see it. So anyway, I'm not going to spend too much time on Trevor Bauer. Hasn't pitched in 2 years. The Dodgers didn't want him back, and the Reds didn't really have a lot of good things to say about him. And the Indians, or excuse me, when he was with the Indians, the Guardians now, there just wasn't a lot of people who were really high on Trevor Bauer. So the Twins clubhouse is really good and in a really good spot, especially with Correa coming back. Don't screw it up by bringing in Bauer, a guy who hasn't pitched in 2 years. So that's my thing on Trevor Bauer. But I think Pablo Lopez or Trevor Rogers from the Marlins. I think the Marlins are team number 1 for the Twins to call. Now, Kepler, somebody the Marlins have had interest in. Luis Arraez. That one might be tough. I know Correa coming back is an energizing move, but trading Arraez would definitely be a blow to morale. It's gonna I think I saw, again, friend of the podcast, Brandon Warren on Twitter, say you're gonna have to give up Arraez and more. It's gonna hurt. And I think that's gonna be the price of doing business. Either you're gonna have to give up some major league ready talent, or you might have to be willing to part with a Brooks Lee type player. A guy Brooks Lee might be the Twins' top prospect, the shortstop who they drafted in the first round with the 8th overall pick. So there's an option. But I think Trevor Rogers and Pablo Lopez aren't your bona fide number 1 starting pitcher, but they're still more of those really solid starting pitchers, and they're more in line with Sonny Gray, Tyler Mahle, and Joe Ryan in terms of the top end of the rotation, more they are in guys who we hope can develop, like Bailey Ober and Josh Winder and Louis Varland, in that kind of realm. They're more in the established guys with a little bit higher ceilings, maybe more with Gray and maybe more with Mahle and Ryan, not so much Sonny Gray, because we pretty much know his ceiling at this point in his career. So I think that's realistically where the Twins go. I'm not the first one to be saying that. Everybody in Twins Twitter is talking about that as a potential place to go. But honestly, why not? Why not go for it? If the Marlins are interested, this is now the time to strike. You have Carlos Correa. Go make a move. Go bolster this team. Now, at the end of the day, if the Twins come in with the starting rotation they have, Mahle at full strength to begin the year makes your team better. Joe Ryan, another year to develop, better. Sonny Gray as your 3 starter looks really nice for this team. Louis Varland and Simeon Woods Richardson and Josh Winder, and I'm missing guys, but there's a Bailey Ober coming back healthy is going to be like, all of these will add to this team. So it's not like the Twins are running back the second half of 2022's team. They're trying to run back the whole team, and they have the talent, and it's a lot of young talent, but give them time to grow. Give Kirilloff and Larnach being healthy. Give a full season of Jose Miranda a chance. There's a lot of ways that this Twins team can really be productive, and there's a lot of ways where they can be good. Even if they roll out the starting rotation the way it is, and maybe even don't make a big move in the bullpen, that's not to say that they can't be in a position to win the division at the trade deadline and go make a move if a starting pitcher becomes available. Now, it's going to be highly competitive, and you're going to have to give up more resources, but that might be the Twins' plan. But based on Falvey and Levine, as we just saw today, they love to surprise us. They love to make moves. They love to just all of this. They come from out of nowhere. Falvey and Levine, when they make a move for the Twins, it never is like 3 weeks of outside of the Correa saga, which is its own separate deal. But even with the ramp up, it came out of nowhere the night before, and then it happened. You look at the Taylor Rogers trade, with him going to San Diego. It all of a sudden just popped up the night before, like, hey, the Twins are thinking about doing this. And all of a sudden, less than 24 hours later, the Twins have already did it. They're a team that's deliberate. And when they're ready to strike, they go for it. So for better or worse, but this is a Twins team that has some intrigue. This is a Twins team that the starting rotation likely won't look the same. And it's going to be interesting to see where this team goes from here. There's a lot of moves that we can make, and there's a lot of moves that we can break down. But guys, I am so happy that Carlos Correa is a Minnesota Twin. I can't let you guys know how excited I am that he's back in the Twin Cities, pending a physical. 2 most important words in all of the baseball offseason this year: pending physical pending. But All signs point to Carlos Correa being back in Minnesota. This is a huge win for the franchise. It's a huge win for Falvey and Levine. It's a huge win for Rocco Baldelli, a huge win for Byron Buxton, for this whole team. And go find some of that Carlos Correa merchandise that's on the team store that's still discounted because they thought he was leaving. Go buy that before it's gone. Not much left. I tried. There's nothing in my size. So go get that while it's cheap, because those Twins uniforms, the new ones, are still $300. So I ain't buying any of that. I got my powder blue jersey on. For those of you watching on the video, I got my powder blue Twins jersey on. It's a Donaldson one, because it was whatever. It was just the best way to acquire it, because not on a team anymore. But hey, it's a powder blue Twins jersey. I would love a powder blue Twins Correa jersey. That'd be awesome. Anyway, this is a big step for the franchise. This is huge. And it's amazing that this happened. This never happens. And it never happens, especially to a team like the Twins. Just savor it. Who knows what the Twins' record will be? Who knows? Maybe the Twins get off-season champs. They still probably don't, because they need to they got Christian Vasquez, which is important. We talked about that. They got now Carlos Correa. Now they got to patch up some other places. And then it's still banking on a lot of young guys to develop in Kirilloff and Larnach and Miranda and Royce Lewis when he gets back July 1st. And if Brooks Lee ever gets up here, if Austin Martin ever gets up here, he should get to the big leagues at some point this season. Nick Gordon's kind of thrown in the mix. There's a lot of players out there. So let's just see what happens here with the Minnesota Twins and everything going on. So guys, thank you so much for listening to this. It's been awesome to get to be back on the podcast and talk about something awesome. My last two podcasts have been kind of downers, so I apologize for that. Carlos Correa is back in a Minnesota Twins uniform pending a physical, and we'll break all of this down more as things develop. I hope to not do another emergency podcast for a while, but Falvey and Levine love to surprise us. Until then, this has been Bombs Away, a Minnesota Twins podcast. I'm your host, CJ Baumgartner. Appreciate all of you guys for listening. You can catch us on Apple and Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, the Pod MN app. Also, we are now going to try and start posting things to YouTube and try and get on that train as well. So thanks for the ride, guys, and we'll see you next time.